Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with another Path of Exile 1 video, talking about the legacy of Phrecia, league starters, build starters, whatever you want to call them. What I got for you today is probably the build that I will be league starting in this event coming tonight, actually the time of this recording, as it's 5 a.m. in the morning here. This is a bit of a special one. I'm going to try to talk about it as briefly, but still as informatively as I can. This is a Paladin, which is, in fact, a duelist starter. However, we are going to be leveling with Poison Concoction. At a certain point, which I'll show you in this POB, we'll be transitioning over to Elemental SRS, the Summon Raging Spirits, which we'll use for the low-budget part of this build. Then, when you transition into a medium budget, we're going to turn this build into a pure Spectre build using Forged Frostbearers. However, as we expect Svalid, the super overpowered shield that was introduced in 3.25 Settlers of Kalgur, I decided to keep the budget at a reasonable state when we get to the high budget version of this and simply run a simple copy of my Spectre build I ran in this league that was tanking tier 17s and running high endgame content, which is using Doriani's prototype in a pure Spectre version running with the Wretched Defilers. And right before we check the path of building, I'm going to tell you to subscribe, hit the like button, all of that jazz to support the channel. I appreciate that very much. Only like 60% of you guys that are watching are not subscribed yet. I mean, come on. It's like 2 seconds. Click the damn button, move on. I appreciate it. Let's get into the video. This is the path of building that we're going to be showing you for this specific build. Now, first and foremost, it's really important to understand, for those of you who might not be familiar with Path of Building or familiar with Path of Exile 1, what you want to do is look at the top right corner, which is now showing low budget LE SRS. If you click this is the loadouts, and you can bounce between the 3 different main budgets for the build. If you click on the high budget non-Svalin, you'll now see the entire skill tree, the entire skill section, the items, the configurations. Everything will be set accurately for the high budget version. Now, the DPS display is a bit inaccurate when it comes to the high budget because of the Wretched Defilers. POB is not able to currently calculate this in a proper way to give us exact numbers on this, so you will be doing more damage to this. And if you go to the medium budget version, this is, however, more accurately displayed. And this is because specters like Forged Frostbearers, they actually have a collateral splash effect, which we see a lot of that happening with minion builds in Path of Exile 2 in the form of the Frost Mages as well as the Arsonists. But in this case, we're using a spectre called Forged Frostbearer, which does the same thing. They have collateral splash, which is why we have a count of 35 in here due to greater volley, just to elaborate as to why this is in the path of building. I'm going to start by showing you the low budget SRS version of this, which is a 4.4 million Shaper DPS version. And before we crack into the details of this, I want to point out how you check this out for leveling. So first and foremost, on the bottom left corner of the path of building, you can check this box here. You'll see a bunch of skill trees. The top 3 are the fully fledged actual endgame tree versions, depending on the budget you're playing. If you click on the 1 to 12, you'll now see that your skill tree is looking very different. In this tree, we're essentially going to expect you to run with a different type of skill set, which I'll show you that the POB is also going to be tackling. And not before long, I will have a written guide for you up on PoE Vault, available for those of you who prefer to have all of this information I'm going to rant on in this video in a written format. However, this is the skill tree from up to level 12, and then we have more trees coming or more points in the tree rather coming in later, and you can keep progressing this to basically give you a sense of progression of where you're going with the tree. There is a breaking point between level 55 to 60, which you'll see here at 59. There is now nothing. This little tree here is actually called Minion Swap Post Cruel Lab Use Faustus. Now, I made a video rather recently on this channel talking about some tips and tricks for how to get into Path of Exile 1 if you're a new Path of Exile 2 player, so do check that out if you haven't played PoE 1 before. But we will have access to the in-game currency auction house. We will also have access to gold in Path of Exile 1 and an NPC called Faustus, where you can use gold to respec points in your tree. This build, the way we've approached this to transition into a minion build, is going to require us to do a little bit of a respec. The Ascendancy nodes that we're going to be picking up when it comes to this class is also quite specific. We're going to be starting with the approach of getting the Light of Divinity, which allows us to get increased elemental damage taken by the enemies. And this node leads to Elemental Valiance. Elemental Valiance provides us with a 25% chance to trigger level 27 Elemental Relic when you or a nearby ally kill an enemy or hit a rare or unique enemy. And why is this so important? The Elemental Relics provides us with Anger, Wrath, and Hatred auras, providing some very nice damage output, which works very well early on in low budget, specifically for the Raiding Spirits. This will, however, change later on to running a Light of Divinity, Bring the Battle, Field Medicine, and then Anointed Champion once you go away from SRS. So this is the Ascendancy nodes you'll be running for the Spectre style in both medium and high budget versions. And the Ascendancy nodes in the leveling stage as well as the campaign you'll be running, and the low budget for that matter, is going to be Light of Divinity over to Elemental Valiance. Then we pick up Field Medicine and then Bring the Battle. That is the current order of these things. So as you get to the point where you transition to your minion approach, now the tree will look very different. So this is where you're going to want to save up all your gold. Don't waste your gold when you play this build if you want to do this transition. It's very likely I will be playing this myself as a starter for the build because I am a humongous Spectre fan and I love playing it. Once you get to the Raiding Spirit transition, this will be done after the second labyrinth, or the Cruel Lab as it's called, giving you those elemental relics. We're moving all of these points over to be speccing into some minion nodes here on the left-hand side, some aura nodes, more minion nodes, and all the way up to Eldritch Battery. And this is something that we're going to be seeing in the skill tree section, because before the Eldritch Battery, essentially, if I go to the minion swap, it's basically showing you an empty tree. Next point is rushing all over this place, picking up some life nodes on the way there, getting Eldritch Battery to make mana cost a bit more smooth to manage, allows us to reserve all of our mana for auras as well. After this, we're getting some more mana and block nodes, as well as Grave Pack for more damage output, and then we get some more life nodes, and then we get some other masteries, including endurance charges. After this, you are done with the campaign, and then some. So then we're going to be looking at the low budget. Click the loadout button up in the top right corner, click on low budget, and you'll see the entirety of the low budget style, full-blown skill tree, and so forth. However, before we tackle the low budget, I'm going to talk about the skills. In the skills sections, you can check on the skill set drop-down menu, and you'll see high budget, medium budget, low budget, act 1, 2, 3, 4, as well as a minion swap. And once you get to the minion swap, the next progression from there is to follow the low budget SRS skill section. So from level 1 to 12, you're going to be using Frostblades, Ruthless, and faster attacks. Switch the Ruthless out for added fire damage after Brutus. This is clearly displayed in the PoE and will obviously be tackled and covered in detail in the written guide. Level 12 and onwards, however, we are going to be using Poisonous Concoction with Volley and Void Manipulation. We'll have a Sniper's Mark when you get access to it. Same thing with Enduring Cry. Shield Charge for mobility with faster attacks. If you want to, you can actually throw in a Frost Blink as well. I'm a humongous fan of that myself. We'll run a War Banner, and then we could check Act 2. The small things we're going to be adding here is going to be Herald of Agony and Herald of Ash and Plague Bearer. And in Act 3, we now have the possibility to find 4 links or get 4 links from the vendors. And that's when we're going to add Cruelty to our main support gems. Other than that, it's basically the same thing, except we're not going to throw in a haste aura. And that's about it for Act 3. In Act 4, same thing here. Some minor changes across the board. So just keep yourself updated by checking the PoE. Now, for the low budget SRS, the main focus of the skill tree is getting the shit fucking hell out of the duelist area. Sorry, all you duelist lovers out there, but we don't like that very much for minion builds to start in this zone. So we're getting out of that area. Pick up the Heart of the Warrior node, get some block nodes on the way out, get some armor life, more block nodes, endurance charges, dual sockets, and life. Very generic, block life oriented, low budget minion, classic style of defenses is basically the entirety of this traveling. Our goal is to get devotion for more life endurance charges, but get to the minion cluster up here. Gives us redemption, righteous army. We get sovereignty for some aura nodes, some more life and chaos rest, more block nodes, more minion nodes, more life nodes, more minion nodes, more life nodes, more minion nodes. It's just going to be that all over the field for low budget, except for one little thing. As you might have noticed, as I told you about it earlier in this video, we're going for Eldritch Battery quite early, which allows us to just reserve all our mana and have our energy shield act as a source for us to pay for our mana cost for our skills, which now will cost energy shield instead. So that's basically the only difference. Other than that, it's life, mini nodes, and block. That's it. Very, very straightforward. And, sprinkle in a little bit of the aura nodes, I guess. So that's the skill tree. It's very straightforward. Skill-wise, however, Raging Spirits will be using Unleash as a support. So that's your first 2-link. Minion damage, elemental damage with attacks, and then you have elemental focus as your last support. So the order of importance here when it comes to Raging Spirits is actually going to be Raging Spirits, Unleash, Minion damage, and Melee Splash. Now, Melee Splash is going to be swapped out for Multi-Strike in case you're doing single-target big boss fights. And then you'll add elemental damage attacks, and elemental focus will be the last support. The other supports or the other skills we're using is Flesh Offering, which will have a trigger weapon. And trigger weapon is basically a wand in this case with plus level of minion skills. Keeping the budget down on something like this would actually mean that you'll have +1, which I just noticed have forgotten to change in this. So I'll be adjusting that. It's only going to be +1. I can do that right now so you see the DPS numbers in this video. So what we're going to do is look at the convening one in this case, which is up here. And I'm going to literally just strip off and lower the minion damage, strip off one of these and save that. And we're still over 4 million DPS. That is basically the current plan of action. We'll have a generic shield. There's no suffixes. There's not even a life on this, which is something I would recommend that you always do. And then we have +1 level on the helmet. So like the gear is very straightforward. But what I'm talking about here when I say trigger weapon is a craft that you find in Acts 8 or 9, I believe it is. And in there, you'll find the bench craft to allow you to put this trigger craft, which basically says that if you use a skill, you'll trigger socket the spells. And what we're going to use in here is an aura. And auras don't get triggered, so that is going to be irrelevant. But the 2 first support gems, or skill gems rather, will trigger. One is Desecrate, which will generate corpses on the ground. Next time you use a skill, it will trigger your Flesh Offering, which will then consume those corpses to buff your minions. That's how that works. Then we have a 2-link setup with 1 open socket. The 2-link, you can have a 3-link, doesn't matter. But the 2-link is your Chaos Golem for physical damage mitigation, together with Feeding Frenzy, which gives a general global buffer minion damage to all of your minions. And the last socket in this slot will be Convocation, which teleports your minions to you. When it comes to the aura setup, we're going to be running a Purity of Elements. This provides you with a lot of resistances to you and your minions. It grants you immunity to elemental ailments such as Shock, Ignite, and Freeze permanently. We're also going to be slotting in Elemental Weakness, which is a curse, and we're going to be using Frostblink, which is a mobility skill in this setup. This is a 4-socket setup because none of these skills needs to be linked, so do keep that in mind, which is clearly telegraphed here in the POB as well. Next 4 sockets we have is a 2-link setup. One is a shield charge with fast attacks. Those 2 gems needs to be linked or the shield charge won't be faster. Very simple. Enduring Cry is providing you with endurance charges and life regeneration. We'll link this with a support called Urgent Orders, which speeds up the process of us casting Enduring Cry. The last one in this setup is a 4-link utility minion setup, and you see here in POB that it says in purple color 1x Arena Master. This is because of how POB is oriented and designed for the configuration reasons. But the links you're using is a Ray Spectre, an Animate Guardian, Meat Shield, and Minion Life. The Animate Guardian, I would not recommend using this unless you know what the hell you're doing. If you're a new player, do check out the Animate Guardian guides that I have linked in the descriptions down below. And I wouldn't recommend actually enabling this and putting gear on it, which actually comes with the opportunity cost of currency of buying those gear pieces until the gem itself is level 18, preferably even wait till it's 19. The Ray Spectre, you can use it as soon as you can. An Arena Master is in fact an enemy you'll find in Drox-influenced maps. And he will be able to be shared in a global Spectre minion channel that I made many, many years ago in-game, which you can access by typing /global, small case letters, /global space 6666. It's not 666. That's apparently an unofficial French community channel that we happened to accidentally invade many years ago. And we were kind enough to leave them be, and we started having our community channel over in 6666 instead. So that's the reason for that. In PoB, however, there's a config setup showing the same supports we have for the Spectre, which is only for purposes of the configuration in Path of Building. We'll be using 2 Carnage Chieftains, which are spectres you'll find in Act 7 Ashen Fields, and they provide frenzy charges to our minions. However, to avoid inflating our DPS in PoB too high, the problem with this Spectre is that it generates frenzy charges once every 4.5 seconds, if you want to be realistic about it. And our Radiant Spirits are going to be resummoned quite often. So when a single target boss fight becomes attackable, all of your current summons will get 2 charges. Great. And then a couple of seconds later, the new summons will have 0. So to make sure that you don't inflate the DPS displayed in Path of Building in the configuration, I've set frenzy charges to only count as if all of your minions only had 1 charge, rather than a large chunk having 2 in the start, and then your last minions having 2, and some of them has 0, and some of them has 1 charge. I'm going to just average them out as 1. So that's how the skill set looks. Gear already covered some of the pieces. The level of minion gems is important on the helmet, but keep in mind that every rare piece of item that you have should always have a life modifier, if possible. I decided not to have that in here just to show that this build will actually have reasonable good stats in low budget despite that. But the life on this should be there. We have a chest piece in which I've covered the information that you can have any sort of corrupted 6-link. Doesn't even need to be corrupted, but any 6-link would be good with the correct colors for your Radiant Spirits. In this case, that would actually mean 1, 2, 3, 4 blue and 2 red colors. And the reason I haven't added any other modifiers on the chest piece is to, again, show that you don't need this to significantly cap your resistances, which opens up for the opportunity to get some chaos rest, better numerical values, attributes, and so forth. However, if you happen to get a chest piece that does not have a life mod, it is recommended to go to a life modifier, Life Mastery, and pick up this mod right there. It gives you 15% increased maximum life if you have no life modifiers on your equipped body armor. So that would be preferable if your body armor you end up with does not have a life mod. Please do keep in mind that you can hold down the Alt key to see tags on the modifiers on your items, because a simple modifier that says life regeneration still counts as a life modifier. We have regular ass energy shield gloves. I would say that armor energy shield would even be better defensively oriented for the build, but any energy shield or energy shield armor would be the 2 type of base items you're looking for. For the gloves, I've added some dexterity, but mostly you're just looking for life and then attributes or resistances depending on what your character needs. Attributes is there for gem requirements and gear requirements, whereas your resistances should always be at 75%. And if you don't have your elemental resistances sorted and your attributes are covered, chaos resistance is very, very, very good to have, but it's a luxury stat on low budget in most builds. Boots, the priority shifts a little bit. You have 2 main modifiers. One is movement speed. Don't neglect movement speed on boots. And then life. Then you focus on resistances. Same thing here. Life or armor. Armor and energy shield being the base stats that you want. But if you have to choose one of them, energy shield is going to be important because of the Eldritch Battery. Jinx Juju is a rather cheap, unique amulet, which does very, very well for you defensively. However, the Death Attunement oiling on this should cost more than pretty much any other items in the build. So wait with this till the late game or later on till you feel you can afford it, or honestly just skip it and wait till you go into a higher budget. It's not that important for the low budget version, but the Jinx Juju will help with defenses quite a lot. A Bone Ring is always attractive. Attribute resistances if needed, but make sure it has a life modifier. And if you want to have any damage mods from this, you want to have something like Minion gives increased attack and cast speed, as it is way better than the increased Minion damage on rings for this specific build. I decided not to add a second Bone Ring just to show again how low we can push the budget on this character, which is going to be using a resistance ring. Maybe you find an amethyst for chaos rest, get life, any attributes and or resistances as needed after that. Belt, normally I would chuck in a Darkness and Throne belt, which looks like this, gives you abyssal sockets. I decided not to do that. We're going to run a regular ass rare belt, preferably a heavy one. Attributes, resistances, make sure you don't forget that life modifier. It needs to have a life mod. It's a rare item. Make sure there's life on it, okay? Life flasks, I use 2 in low budget builds. Sometimes when you're comfortable with the build, I'd say just use 1. but let's stick with 2. At least one of them should be an instant roll flask, and at least one should have a bleed removal. And then the remaining flask is a basalt for more armor, granite for even more flat armor, and a quicksilver for movement speed. As you might have noticed, none of these flasks have any modifiers, and that is because the modifiers you want tends to be pretty expensive, unless you get lucky, of course. So basically, I've decided to not show any modifiers. Anything is better than nothing, and it doesn't matter. We're not going to focus on a flask on a budget such as this. So just use the correct flask, and whatever mods you have, keep it. It's fine. Jewels, however, what we're going to be doing is keeping the budget down. It's pretty good rolls, actually, but what you want to have is, again, life modifier, and then minion damage if you use the minion skill recently, or minion attack speed, or minion flat cold damage, or minion cold flat damage, or minion fire flat damage, or minion physical damage. And there goes my voice, because I'm still having an ear infection and being pretty sick. So I apologize for my losing voice here. So let's see how far we can get. In the configuration tab, I haven't added the pantheons here, so I'll do that right now. Since we're already immune to elemental ailments, we'll actually skip the Brine King, which is a classic minion approach. For the souls, we'll be using Solar Lunaris for the big one, and minor one becomes Gruthkul. Or is it Garrican? No, Gruthkul. There we go. For physical damage mitigation to help boost that a little bit. And that's about it. Do it this way. However, this budget is obviously ridiculously low. You're going to be able to do the majority of your in-game content, and clearing up the red tier maps. Should be able to do all your the big stones. I played PoE too long, so I forgot the name of them, but the ones that upgrade your maps. Jesus Christ, waystone crystals. I don't. Wow. Endgame content, you'll be fine. Moving on to the next budget. This is where things get very tricky, because now this build is essentially becoming another type of build, which is why I'm really excited about playing this myself. So I might actually do this. We're going to be doing a medium budget. We'll cover this in detail more in the written guides, of course, when it comes to this type of content. What we're doing with the medium budget is now moving entirely away from Radiant Spirits, and the big things here is that this budget is going to cost quite a lot more, but this is what the finalized full version of this build would look like. We're going to be using a Wraith Lord, which is recommended to be looking at a little later, because this is an item that drops from a tier 17 boss, which means it's going to take a while before you get access to it. It makes you not able to have any other minion except for spectres. That means your Anemic Guardian goes away, your SRS goes away, your Golem goes away, everything. You don't need them anymore. However, for each socketed ghastly eye jewel, or as I like to call them, gassy eye jewels, you know, pat myself on the shoulder there. Anyways, gets you an additional maximum +2 number of specters. This means that in this specific build, in the version here, I'm going to run the gear down real quick for you boys. We're going to be sitting on 8 specters. In this version, we are in fact going to be using a +2 level minion weapon, which is the same, basically the same weapon as we had before. But in this budget will be, oh, that is not the right weapon. That is the right one. In this build, we are going to be using +2. That's +1 to level spell skills, +1 to level minion skills, and a trigger, again, as expected. We'll be using a shield. This time we want to have +1. We want to have that life in there, and any attribute of resistance as needed. And the Wraith Lord helmet, as described, I have not changed the jewels to keep budget down in the medium as best as I could, but it's the same jewels here. If you're able to find something with chaos resistance or other resistances to open up that rest from other items, that is very, very, very attractive. So I have a handful of the jewels like this that has chaos rest, but as you know, you can get attributes or elemental rest to compensate that necessity on your other gear pieces to be able to pick that up elsewhere. It is quite attractive to actually go for something like chaos resistance cap for this, because we will be using Fourth Vow. This is an item that allows us to have our armor help us mitigate chaos damage that we take from hits, not dots, but hits. It also gives us a chaos rest, a lot of armor, and energy shield from the body armor. Very nice chest piece. I don't know how expensive this will be, or how popular it will be to be used. So I'm going to be a little conservative on that, but this is going to be the piece that I'll be aiming for with this specific build. We're going for armor, energy shield, or pure armor pieces. In our case, we're looking for pure armor now, and that is simply because of the fact that physical damage will be that we take is bypassing our energy shield, so we don't really care that much about energy shield. We don't need Eldritch Battery for this version either. So we're using pure armor pieces as long as you can color the items properly, which you can do with the benchcraft. Otherwise, you'll just do armor energy shield pieces to ease up on that pressure. The gloves, minion damage from the Essence of Fear, and then we'll just have any other attributes that you want, resistances that you want, and then make sure there's a life mode. Again, I'm not going to repeat myself on that topic too much. Boots, similar approach as always, just movement speed, life, the whole shebang. That's basically the main focus. Something I haven't added to this is obviously Eldritch Implicits, which you can use on both gloves and boots. Again, I wanted to keep the budget down quite a lot, but you can use very low tier versions of those and add some more beneficial stats to your character that way. We'll be using a replica Dragon Fangs Amulet, which is supposed to give levels to Prey Spectres. I'm expecting this one to be very cheap in the coming league, or the event rather. We'll be running double bone rings, and mainly that is to chase down that increased attack and cast speed modifier, which I would like to have on both rings. Again, life and then resistances and attributes. However, compared to the low budget build in this budget, we will be using Darkness Enthroned, which preferably a pretty high roll of increased effect of socketed abyssal jewels, which basically is that you put 2 jewels in your belt, and the roll on the belt will amplify the effect of all modifiers on those 2 jewels. This is a perfect opportunity to use things like Chaos Resistance or Elemental Rest or even attributes to put in a belt like this. As I mentioned before, when it comes to Flask, I am actually still using 2 Life Flask here. We are going to add a unique block chance flask, which is called Rumi's Concoction. This will take the Granite slot flask. You can't use 2 granites, so they will overrule one another. However, we are now actually caring about the modifiers in your flasks. So for the Basalt Flask, you want to have a Flagellant, which gives you charges when you're hit. Even if you block the attack, it will now rapidly increase the charges on the flask. You'll use an Owl modifier as a suffix, which reduces effects or curses on you. And you'll use Enkindling Orbs, I believe it is, which enchants the flask. You use this on the benchcraft as well, which makes this flask use itself when your charges reaches full to automate this flask. You don't have to think about it anymore. Same thing comes down to the Quicksilver Flask, but you also want to have a suffix modifier that increases the amount of armor you get during flask effects. Outside of this, I'm going to skip the Forbidden Flesh and talk about them last. We are going to want to have a Watcher's Eye if you can get your hands on one. I decided to have a non-perfect roll, but only one modifier that applies to us, which is additional physical damage mitigation when you are affected by determination. Outside of this, just more Ghastly Eye Jewels, but we're going to come to the cluster. We are going to be running a large cluster. The meta clusters that people are using for high endgame minion builds comes with modifiers such as 35% increased effect, high life, and 3% increased attack cast speed as a suffix. And the last suffix is either comes in the form of specific res, specific attributes, or all resistances, or sometimes a keystone. I've only added 3 poorly rolled modifiers on this 12 passive minion damage cluster. And that is just to give it some more damage, and efficiency is also provides it with some life. This is connected into a small cluster, which is giving a second skin. And this is where I'd like your eyes to look at the block chance for this budget. Yes, it is saying 95% chance to block attacks and 94% chance to block spells. And yes, that is inflated as fuck. And I'm going to explain why. If you happen to get to this state of this character's budget and you play with this build, I'm sure you're going to have a great time doing tons and tons of damage. You might want to see yourself get ridiculous survivability by simply being a goddamn duelist. Look at his smug fucking face. Look at him. Look at him go. Look at that face. He has access to the gladiator, which has access to more than skill. And luckily, the other Legacy of Phrecia ascendancies for the duelist sucks dick. So therefore, I'm expecting this Forbidden Flesh and Flame to hopefully be somewhat affordable. If that is the case, we'll be using 2 of those to give us lucky block chance. This happens when you have blocked recently. Recently refers to the last 4 seconds. 4 seconds means that if you have not blocked attack recently, my block chance with this... Wrong one. There we go. My block chance will be 78% chance for both attacks. 4 attacks and 76% with this specific POB for spells. That means that less than a quarter of the attacks that are coming into you will actually hit you. And if you block one of those, you can check this box. And after blocking one of those in the past 4 seconds, there's only a 5% chance that you will take a hit from an attack. There's only a 6% chance that you'll take a hit from a spell now. And if you block any attacks or spells during that 4-second window, the 4-second window repeats itself and will just be refreshed, essentially. Basically, you're not going to take any hits. But then again, you want to make sure you can survive when you finally do take a hit. So that's why it looks like this. And yes, I would say it's inflated, but I wanted to explain this in the video so people know why and how. The custom configs, as I actually didn't mention this in the low budget either, but this is showing you the Ascendancies being added and or other effects if needed. That'll be shown in there. That's about it for the gear and the skill tree for the medium budget. Actually, not so much of the skill tree. It's actually about the same, except for cutting this part of the tree to fit in the cluster compared to the previous SRS version. Skills, however, we are going to socket in 6-link Spectres Forged Frost Bears. Forged Frost Bears are found in the Settlers or Calgura League mechanic from the Verisium Vord Veins, but like I mentioned, just come to the global channel and ask for them. They should be available for people to be sharing by myself, my community, or anyone else coming into that global channel roughly 10 to 15 hours after the league has launched. We'll be using the Minion damage, Awaken preferably, Spell Echo, Greater Volley, that's your first 4 links, and 3 supports, but first 4 links. Hypothermia, and then Cold Penetration. The support gems for our trigger weapon is, again, Desecrate Flesh Offering, but this time you want that to be a 3-link so you can add Life Tap. Since we're no longer using Energy Shield to pay for our cost of our skills, this is going to cost too much mana, so we're using Life Tap to pay life instead. And luckily, this build is packing over 1,000 life regeneration per second, which is quite ridiculous. And then the aura setup is going to be a Tempest Shield, Purity of Elements, Frostbite, and Hatred. Frostbite is not an aura. It is indeed a curse. So let me just add that because I can't even think when I'm not feeling this well. So I do apologize, boys. So that is a 4-socket auras and curse. Purity of Elements, as mentioned before. Hatred gives your minions increased cold damage, and if any minions do physical damage, percent of their fist damage is added as cold. Tempest Shield gives you immunity to shock, but you get that from Purity of Elements already. However, it gives you plus the spell block. Next up is, we'll take this soon, we'll have a shield charge, and we'll have Frost Blink, which does not need to be linked. They can be socketed. And then the 2-link is going to be, no, actually, no, all of these should be linked. Shield Charge and Frost Blink with Life Tap, and you also have Enduring Cry for that extra approach there for the Endurance Charge and Life Regeneration. Without Enduring Cry, you're only going to regenerate 870 life, which is perfectly fine. It's still ridiculously good for the build. Life Tap just makes the spells cost life. The last one is a 2-link, 1-socket. We have Convocation. Similar to the low budget using Golem for this, we are going to have a separate Raise Spectre skill. And the reason for this is to have a perfect Guardian Turtle. This is a purchasable corpse that you actually is an item that you'll just go to your hideout, right-click the corpse, and it will become the item, and it will become a corpse on the ground in your hideout. And then that can be used to raise the Spectre version of a Guardian Turtle, which provides you with Determination, which is why we're using the Watcher's Eye. Now, do keep in mind, I don't want to point this out for people so you actually know what you can actually accidentally do. These corpse specters cannot be re-corpsed after they've been done. You place them on the ground, make sure you make a specter out of that bastard. When you do, either unequip or remove Desecrate and Offering from your weapon, or this motherfucker will consume that corpse you just spent your hard-earned money on getting. No, there's no quality of life in this. Yes, it sucks. Yes, I've done it myself multiple times with specters that are way more expensive than what I'm talking about here. Don't make my mistake. And the mistake that thousands of other people have done. Don't do that. Anyways, that's how you get a perfect Guardian Turtle. Luckily, the Forged Frost Bears, you don't have to worry about those. They're shareable. You can just desecrate them. It's fine. But that's how this build is going to be operating, and that covers the medium budget. And my voice is about to disappear, so I'll try to speed run the general consensus and detail surrounding the high budget version. because now shit's gonna get wild. I would not recommend trying to step slowly into this version. I would, however, say that there are some items you can upgrade from the medium budget version as you're looking to play the high budget. As you might have noticed, we're going to be running Wretched Defilers, which is a Spectre that is desecratable, but they come from a tier 17 map. This is not something I would recommend playing unless you have the budget to cover the Dorian's prototype. I'll explain that mechanic momentarily. However, what we're looking at doing here is going through the skills. Same setup when it comes to the trigger weapon, your auras and your curses. Your curse becomes a mark, but your auras changes a bit into Purity of Ice, Tempest Shield, Arctic Armor. Don't use the Vault version. It's just a fun thing to do, but don't use it. The Race Spectre for the Guardian Turtle now instead becomes a Spirit of Fortune, as you can see here in the PUB. The mobility and Enduring Cry becomes about the same as well, and the support terms of Spectres changes. However, what I'm going to be talking about is the fact that in here we're using one Spirit of Fortune, but we're also using a Guardian Turtle, and the 6 Spectres becomes Wretched Defilers instead of 7 Forged Frostbearers. Skill tree, like I mentioned, there are some different items that you can upgrade from medium to high budget without that making any issues. It actually will be better for your medium budget build, and that is changing your actual large cluster to a proper meta one, which is 35% increased effect, 3% increased cast attack speed, high life, and then either all attributes or chaos resistance is what we're aiming for on this version specifically. Now, this could change depending on the amount of resistances or attributes you get in your other gear pieces, but one of these type of jewels is actually very attractive that you can play with when it comes to starting your progression from medium to high. However, there are some other changes. Obviously, you want to get yourself a bigger wand. You can get some absolutely ridiculous ones when it comes to the high budget version. You can get better values in your shield. In my case, for the high budget, we're looking at maximum cold rest or maximum all rest, level of minions, and minion damage with HP. Again, I want to point out and reiterate and repeat myself that the damage of PoB here is inaccurate. You actually will be doing significantly more. And this is the build I played with in this league before the event to tank tier 17 maps with. The jewels in general is going to be higher budget. I don't have to go through it in detail. We're again going to be now adding implicits on our gear to be really good value in those. We have Elder Pair boots with level of Race Spectres, Replica Dragon, same thing here. We have a ridiculous ring, which I'll talk about later, in Galando's Touch, which is also ridiculous expensive. Higher roll, Darkness and Throne, ridiculous jewels again. Progenesis is a luxury item, but fits the high budget theme. Watcher Sign no longer has one usual modifier. Instead, now it has 2. We're adding a very important detail here, which I'll tackle in a bit. We'll run a Light of Meaning, which gives us chaos resistance in that specific spot. Really good to help cap the chaos res. And then we'll have a Glorious Vantage, which I'll also talk about, and a Sublime Vision. So let's talk about the details and why we're doing this stupidity. Essentially, we are making our Dorian's prototype version out of this, which means that now we want to have our lightning rest down to negative, which caps at 200. The lower the goes, the better. Cap is 200. If you can get to 200, great. Now you do stupid amount of damage. However, Dorian's prototype makes it so that lightning damage that you take will be mitigated by armor instead, but only on hits. And unlike Path of Exile 2, in PoE 1, lightning damage over time effects exists in a variety of shapes and forms, such as the Mana Siphoner, which exists in PoE 2, but in PoE 1, that motherfucking effect deals lightning damage over time. That will kill this build, unless you do what I've done in this PoB. There's a few other things. The Eater of Worlds adds the Tentacles, I believe it is, does a lightning dot. The Constrictor Elder Guardian does lightning dot. The Baron Shaper Guardian does a lightning dot square effect on the ground. Those things, you just have to stay the fuck away from them and mostly not play Eater Worlds. But I've solved this with this approach, and I love this because those things don't even bother you. It's so crazy that you don't even need fire resistance when you play this build. I love it. So basically, that's how Dorian's prototype work. And to mitigate and solve this situation I was just talking about, what we do is we run a Watcher side with a modifier that says 20%. It has to be 20%, which is a top roll. It has to be 20% or it won't work. fire and lightning damage taken, not from hits, just any fire and lightning damage that you take will now be taken as cold damage instead. The other source of this is Sublime Vision, which means 30% of fire and lightning damage taken, not from hits, any source, is taken as cold damage instead. This means 50% of any sort of lightning or fire damage is now mitigated by your cold resistance instead, which we are bringing up to 90%, which is the cap. So that mitigates all of that damage significantly, and we don't have to worry about it. But what about the remaining 50%? This is where Glorious Vanity Timeless Jewel of Sibaka, very important that is Sibaka, comes into play in this specific position that gives us Divine Flesh. Now, all of our damage that we take bypasses our energy shield. Energy shield becomes irrelevant. However, it gives us plus 5% to Chaos Rest. And what it does is that those remaining 50% is now going to be taken as Chaos damage instead. So now we only care about cold and Chaos resistance. And this is 50% of elemental damage. So physical damage you still need to mitigate. So we only take Fizz, Chaos, and cold damage in this character. You never see lightning. You never see fire. They are mitigated through these sources. And it does cover dots as well. Very important to point out. So, very tricky, very advanced mechanics. I would not recommend this unless you know what you're doing or can understand what it is I'm saying. So this is not for the newer players. That's why it's a high budget build. However, I do want to talk about the ring. I have a Calandra's Touch. What it does is that it basically has the same modifier that my other ring has. And this is a cracked ring. You can get much cheaper rings than this. This is the ring I made myself in the league that I was playing with. So I wanted to show it off because I'm very proud of it. You have a ring that you want to have significant amounts of life from. But most importantly, you're looking for a vast amount of negative lightning resistances. In PoE 1 at the moment, you are able to find these reflected rings through a variety of sources. But most importantly is, or most effectively is to craft them yourself. But that can be very expensive. It's using I believe it's called a Mist of Reflection that randomly fucks over your item. It's like a Giga Vol Orb that corrupts the item. But this one makes it mirrored. And what happens is you get two versions of the item. And some of the modifiers will essentially be amplified to be higher value, and some of them will be twisted to be amplified to a higher value, but a negative value. And essentially, the biggest hit you can get is to have a life with negative lightning resistances, with minion damage, with minion attack and cast speed, but you don't have to have all of the modifiers. You can actually find rings that are similar to this and not have that damage, not have that minion attack cast speed, but have a significant reduction to lightning resistances. And you can run two of those for a very, very cheap price to be able to run this build before going crazy. But this is what I would recommend for the super high budget version of this. So I just want to point out that this build can be played with a lower budget. This budget, I mean, can be played with a lower amount of investment by running two cheaper versions of this ring by sacrificing some of the damage. I'm very, very excited about this build. It's something I love playing. And this time I would love to try that out as a Paladin. As I mentioned earlier, when it comes to the Ascendancy nodes, is that in this version, we don't use the elemental Valiant, that only a Valiance. This only applies for campaign and elemental SRS version. Once you go medium budget and high budget version of this build, which are kind of different builds in the end, you'll run Light of Divinity, Bring the Battle, Field Medicine, and Anointed Champion. And that's the end of my voice. I hope this video covered most of the details, if not all. Otherwise, I'll just leave a POB in the link to the descriptions below. And once a written guide is posted and ready for this build, it will be available in the descriptions and linked down below as well. If you have any questions about this build or anything seems confusing, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'll try to make time to respond to them before the league or the event launches in 19 hours or something. Actually, more than that, 15 hours. Less than that, 15 hours. So I wish you all the best of luck in Legacy of Phrecia. I apologize for this long video, but I wanted to make sure all the details gets across the board for the new players. Hit the like button, subscribe for more content. I'll see you guys in Path of Exile Raid Class PoE 1. Till next time, as always, stay safe and keep rocking.